On January 28, 1986, a proud nation watched as NASA prepared to launch Space Shuttle Challenger. Before the Challenger, there had been other space shuttles, but the Challenger was a historic launching. After all, along with the 6 astronauts, the Challenger was transporting Krista McAuliffe, a school teacher who was planning to teach from space. School children from around the nation proudly watched in their classrooms, counting down with the rest of the nation. Joy turned to sorrow as the unbelievable happened. The Challenger disintegrated in front of their eyes. Gone were Krista McAuliffe and 6 fellow astronauts. An investigation revealed that there was a faulty O-ring that caused the disaster. NASA, the pride of the nation, had let everyone down. The Challenger disaster created a turning point at NASA, causing them to look at safety for the shuttles and crews, and to further the exploration of space. The dream of space shuttles like the Challenger was born in the 50s. The 50s were good times for America. Almost 80% of households purchased their first TVs, and families were entertained as well as informed. This period of time was also known as the Fearful 50s. Although the United States and the Soviet Union were allies during World War II, the two countries had two different economic and political systems. A strong competition developed as each nation tried to advance their philosophies throughout the world. The space race became part of the Cold War, with the Soviet Union taking the lead. They sent up the first orbiting object, the Sputnik satellite, on October 4, 1957, that orbited the Earth every 96 minutes and remained in orbit until January 4, 1958. The success of the Sputnik satellite was a huge victory for the Soviet Union. Due to the success of the Soviets, in 1958, President Dwight Eisenhower signed the creation of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Bill. After its formation, NASA was ready to start sending men into the great unknown. Kennedy addressed to the nation about his plans to send a man to the moon before the turn of the decade.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Project Mercury, which included 7 astronauts, were the first manned missions. John Glenn, the 3rd Mercury astronaut, became the first American to reach orbit around the Earth. The U.S. was now in a space race with Russia to get to the moon. Next came Gemini with 16 astronauts, perfecting spaceflight. And finally, Apollo became the 3rd human spaceflight program carried out by NASA. Then, tragedy struck with Apollo 1. During a test launch, the ship burst into flames and the astronauts were killed. However, hope was high when Apollo 11, on July 20th, 1969, made the first landing on the lunar surface.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
As the Apollo program progressed, NASA started to use up its budget, so they needed to make something cheaper. They started to make the design for a plane-like orbiter that could land and be reused. They came up with the design for space shuttles. They were much lighter and reusable, so it saved NASA money and time. On April 12, 1981, STS-1 became the first shuttle in space. In the 1980s, shuttles became the new way to travel in space, taking payloads as satellites and performing atmospheric research. By 1984, they had launched 45 shuttles into orbit. Soon, from launching all these ships, their safety commission was noticing a problem with their solid rocket booster, also known as SRB. In 1985, NASA was warned about this problem, but they still refused to stop launching their ships. By this time, NASA was getting ready to launch Challenger, STS-51L space shuttle. They decided to pick one teacher to go into space. So out of 1,500 teachers, Krista McAuliffe got to be the teacher in space. Krista McAuliffe was a teacher from New Hampshire, where she taught high school. She was planning to teach all her lessons to school children across America from space. On January 26, 1986, the ship was almost ready for launch, but got canceled due to a jam lock. It was scheduled for the next day. The next day, the Challenger was ready for launch, but due to a storm, They canceled until the following day. On January 28th, the Challenger was ready for liftoff. Even though the temperature was freezing, they still launched. As the Challenger left the launch pad, all seemed fine. However, people witnessed strange smoke coming from the solid rocket booster. Then major disaster struck. 73.5 seconds into its flight, a strange gas lit up in the sky, spreading smoke quickly. It shocked the American people. Students, teachers, and all America watched helplessly in horror as the realization set in that the Challenger has exploded. News came in that everyone on the ship was feared dead. Investigators found parts of the ship 12 miles off coast, confirming all the passengers had perished. NASA claimed that their program was a very risky business. Even the President, Ronald Reagan, spoke on this tragedy that would change NASA history.
Slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God.
Due to the fines from their safety commissions, they had to cancel all of their shuttles for 1986 and 1987. A commission was formed from the military, former astronauts, other NASA workers, scientists, and NASA suppliers. In the commission hearings, NASA tried to defend their case, blaming it on a parts manufacturer, Morton Thoekel, but failed. When the government found out how NASA lied and did not put the safety of their crew first, there was a demand to stop the space shuttle program and fix it. The commission found that there was a problem with their O-rings that had gotten frigid because of the cold temperatures. The O-rings kept hot gases from leaving the solid rocket boosters. Because once the hot gases got out, it caught fire. Then it collided into the fuel tank and the Challenger exploded with the rest of the spacecraft. The investigation was a turning point that showed NASA needed to maintain their equipment. NASA found that the seals needed to be stronger, so the engineers fixed that problem as soon as possible. However, they found that they could not launch in such cold weather. They made a new rule, not to launch under 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. They also added doors in order for the crew to get out in case of an emergency, such as fire in the crew cabin. They would be able to jump out at 10,000 meters above the ground. They also remanufactured their solid rocket boosters. It took 2 years to make all these changes in the space shuttle program. These safety fixes to the shuttles proved to be a great help, although the changes that NASA made were not perfect. On February 1st, 2003, Space Shuttle Columbia was coming back from its orbit when the shuttle broke up due to loose foam striking the shuttle's left wing.
If Columbia had not occurred, if Columbia's management had not repeated some of the areas, some of the errors that occurred with Challenger, then I think the space shuttle program would have continued to fly perhaps another 10 or 20 years.
In July 2011, the last space shuttle to leave Earth was Mission Atlantis STS-135. The space shuttle era had come to a close. In 1998, NASA and Russia launched parts to construct the International Space Station with the help of the space shuttle. With the future of spaceflight without the space shuttles, it seems impossible, but NASA has found a way to start sending men up another way. Now NASA is starting to make deals with other countries and corporations. Other alternatives for the space shuttle may be using Atlas V and Delta IV rockets to send astronauts into space. Although the Challenger was one of NASA's worst failures, it made NASA grow as an agency. It showed America that NASA was not perfect and was able to weather major turning points to fix their problems. In 2007, teacher Barbara Morgan went up in Space Shuttle Endeavour, and then she taught her students about the mission when she got back. In 2013, Sergei Revin went to the International Space Station and taught kids directly from space. These two missions fulfilled Kristen McAuliffe's dream. Because of the Challenger disaster and the Teacher in Space, now there's a lot of Kristen McAuliffe schools around the nation. There are Challenger of America centers that try to enhance the learning of kids and space. This proves Kristen McAuliffe's dream is still alive, and that a turning point that was a disaster could help force people to turn a negative into a positive result.